So let's get started. Hello, everyone. I am just really happy and truly delighted to welcome all of you to the second in a series of 5 presentations being given by the rabbis and teachers of the Center for Contemporary Musar, also known as CCM. My name is Philip Shore, and I'm a board member here at CCM. So what is our goal in these presentations and this evening? In a sentence, our goal is to make this coming Passover Seder different. What we really want is that when you tell your friends and relatives in the week after the Seder how it went, we want it to be something different than, oh, thank God, we got through 15 steps in 15 minutes and then we ate. It reminds me of a comedian routine that you can see on YouTube by Sebastian Maniscalco. He describes meeting his new Jewish girlfriend and going to what he thought was a holiday dinner. He says, I was starving to death and we sat down at the dinner table and these Jewish people started handing out pamphlets instead of food. Seeing my condition, my girlfriend leaned over and said, we read first before we eat. And I told her that she didn't understand, that I'm Italian and I'm hungry and I need good Italian bread. And the next thing I knew, they were handing out some kind of dried cracker with no flavor at all. This all too common experience is what we are trying to change. We're trying to change from the profane to the sacred. It is our hope that as we approach this coming Passover and our Seders, that we find ourselves with an opportunity to make this holiday different. We want these presentations to give us insights and practices that will increase the meaningfulness and joyfulness of the experience of this holiday. Of course, each holiday should afford us the wonderful comfort of going back to the repetition of the wonderful rituals with our family and friends. But it also gives us an opportunity to dig into the deep metaphorical meaning that Seder represents and Passover represents, and to experience new ways to translate the significance of this holiday into our lives. In Musar terms, it should serve as an opportunity for us to grow in our capacity to hear and see the soul of those closest others and to bear their burden and to serve their needs right there at the Seder table. After all, if we do not continue to learn to transcend our own imprisonments, we will never cross the desert and never enter the land of Israel, metaphorically, as we would like to do. It is my guess that you would not be spending your time this evening with us unless you are not a spiritual seeker and want to continue to engage in a Jewish spiritual practice that can uniquely make a difference in your relationships and your lives. For myself, I have definitely found that the teachings and Musar practice of the Center for Contemporary Musar has made that kind of difference in my life. With that introduction, let me move on to some of the instructional points for our presentation this evening. Number 1, please look you can click on the Zoom screen and look in your left lower corner and make sure that you're on mute, meaning that you will see a slash through the icon in the lower left corner of the Zoom screen. That way we don't interrupt the presenters. Number 2, we welcome your questions. We're not being Jewish if we don't ask good questions, and lots of them. We encourage them, but please do not raise your hands. We have a lot of participants and keeping track of whose hands up and not. So please put them into the chat room area. And after each presenter, and there's going to be 4 presenters, we will get those questions to the appropriate presenter. And at this time, I'm more than happy and delighted to introduce tonight's lead presenter. He's my rabbi and the senior rabbi at Shomer Torah Synagogue in Los Angeles, Rabbi Richard Camras. Rabbi Camras has taught our Musar group class over the last 10 years, patiently answering our seemingly infinite number of questions, some of them from myself, with perfect equanimity and clarity. He's a wonderful teacher. I know you'll enjoy his presentation along with 3 other congregants that are going to share Musar lessons in their life specific to family interactions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Rabbi Richard Camras. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, so much for that wonderful introduction, for your kind words, and for being a part of the CCM board. It's nice to know that besides up north where Rabbi Bodinger is, that we have some representation here down in Southern California. So that's really nice. It's always an honor to teach at CCM, and for CCM in particular, to teach in front of my teacher, Rabbi Ira Stone. So thank you all, and it's nice that you are with us this afternoon or this evening. And I'm delighted to be with three members of various Musar classes that I've taught over the course of the years at Shomrei Torah: Paul Einseidler, Valerie Edwards, and Cheryl Kolker. We're going to hear from them in a little bit. I wanted to give a brief introduction, and I'm going to do that by way of, I'm going to share my screen and turn to a little PowerPoint. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Where it says Bechol Dor Vador, facing the other. So I wanted to speak specifically about seeing, because I think in many ways the Exodus story is all about seeing. When you have a few minutes, go back into your Chumashim and take a look, starting at the beginning of the story, and notice how often the word re'eh, to see, appears in the opening chapters of the story of Exodus. Exodus is about seeing, and it's about, as it begins in the very beginning, not knowing, not seeing, when Pharaoh doesn't know the Jewish people and doesn't know Joseph. It's a story in many ways about faces. It's a story about discovering the other. As Rabbi Stone and Dr. Beulah Trey said last week, it's a story of movement from slavery or self-absorption towards freedom and service to the other. For just a few short examples of scene, I consider, or want you to consider, number one, when the midwives are instructed by Pharaoh to kill the firstborn males, they see in the faces of the mothers that they care for the face of humanity, and they reject Pharaoh's decree. Or the moment that Pharaoh's daughter chooses to see baby Moshe in the basket, and the Hebrew emphasizes that she sees with the words v'tiftach v'tira'eh. She opened up her eyes and she saw the boy, as Miriam on the side saw and watched what was going to happen. She didn't need to open up her eyes because she probably heard the sound of crying, but she did. She took a look and she responded. And of course, when we first encounter Moses going out from the palace to see the sufferings of his brethren and him looking this way and that way in order to find out if anybody else will do something, but he uses sight in order to seek justice. So the Exodus story is a story about seeing, but it's about seeing beyond ourselves. And it's more than a moment in life, it becomes a paradigm. In contrast to so much of Western culture that is dominated by self-interest and self-sufficiency and self-preservation, especially at the expense of others, the Exodus teaches us Bechol Dor Vador. And I want to jump to something that Ira and Bu said last week, that the idea of Bechol Dor Vador transforms Seder from being a mere historical event into a personal narrative. And the question they posed is, what does it mean for us to be a slave, and what it means for us to be taken out of slavery toward responsibility? There's a very well-known Jewish artist. His name is David Moss, and one of the first wonderful creations that he created was the Haggadah, which many of you may be familiar with. And there is this wonderful page in the Haggadah that focuses on Bechol Dor Vador, and I have a copy of it here. I also will show you on my screen, if you can see, because you can see it better, that on the page, not only are there faces of our ancestors, but there are mirrors next to the faces. The mirrors are an opportunity for us, I think, in his retelling of the story, to not only look at our own faces, but to look at the faces of the people who are sitting around our Seder table. And usually the faces who are sitting around the Seder table are those who are our closest others, those who we interact with most often, and usually those who we may have some of our greatest challenges, because the closest others to us are the ones that make the most demands on us and challenge us in our raw energy. And so maybe B'chol Dor Vador, one way of thinking about it, certainly the way that I read the Midrash of David Moss's Haggadah, is that as we respond to these words, B'chol Dor Vador Chayav Adam Lirot et Atzmo, it's not only that we are to see ourselves, but we are to use the mirror as a face of being able to see each other who are sitting around the room, our closest others. This idea of faces reminds me of the teacher that Rabbi Stone learned much of his Musar from originally, which is Emmanuel Levinas, who taught that being isn't about existence alone, it's about the responsibility that comes with being alive. And he asked, what right or justification do I have to be in the face of the other person's suffering and death? And how do I need to respond to the other person's suffering? According to one of Levinas's students, Terry Velling, he writes in his book that every face we encounter is a face of otherness. Every face says, I am other to you. Every face says, I am not you. Every face says, don't kill me, don't absorb me into your world. Don't assimilate me by making me the same as you. I am other, I am different, I am not you. So the challenge of the B'chol Dor Vador, the challenge of the Seder, is to really be able to understand that when we look into the face of the other, that face is demanding, making demands on us, obligating us, challenging us to be able to serve them. As Levinas says, the other becomes my neighbor precisely through the way the face summons me, calls for me, begs for me, and in so doing, recalls my responsibility, calls me into question. So we're going to skip that because I want to have more time for our panelists. We're going to jump to the questions posed by Rabbi Stone and Dr. Trey last week, and think about the face of the other in the context of B'chol Dor Vador, and ask our panelists, first Valerie Edwards, followed by Paul Einseidler, and concluding with Cheryl Kolker, to answer the question, where are we leaving from? Where are you leaving from? What are the steps in the journey? Where are we going toward? How is it that your Musar work brought you personally to experience redemption vis-a-vis a family member? And how do you stay awake to your responsibility to your closest other? And how do you maintain your tov, right, a state of semi-permeability, which we learned last week, in confrontation with your other who refuses to be in his or her tov? So I'm going to turn to Valerie, and she is going to share with us a little bit of how her Musar work has helped her to find moments of redemption in the face of her closest other, challenging her all the time to be able to internalize the lessons of Musar and achieve a Yitziat Mitzrayim, an exodus from Egypt, in relationship to this other that she's going to share with us now. Valerie.
Rabbi, let me, excuse me, Valerie, excuse me for interrupting. I just wanted to, again, after each presenter, address some possible questions. So, Rabbi, this is not a question actually from the participants, but I'll throw it in for you. You know, one of the things that makes CCM unique is Rabbi Stone's embracing of Emmanuel Levinas's teaching. And Levinas was a French philosopher of the 20th century that is considered the philosopher's philosopher. But his philosophy actually was generated by virtue of him being in the Holocaust and enslaved in the Holocaust, his own imprisonment there, and how his teachers, Heidegger, who taught him philosophy, had the philosophy of phenomenology that Heidegger had taught still allowed for the horrors of the Holocaust and the immorality to occur. So Levinas's mission for the rest of his life was to try to understand how a scientific, rational philosophy could demand ethical behavior in the face of the other. So in the same way that our Musar teachings, and when we go to the Yirat Hashem moment, where we are awed and in fear, trembling before the face of the other, it's that moment in which we have the possibility of truly seeing the other, and what Levinas actually says, the divine within the other. And that's a statement, but I wanted to see if you wanted to expand upon that a little bit in terms of how our Musar practice actually gives us an opportunity to do what Levinas is teaching us to try to do.
So I could answer that question, but in reality, our panelists and the stories they are going to share with us, I think in many ways, Philip, answers that very question, right? As you said, Levinas taught that, I think the quote was, ethics begins before the exteriority of the other. That he likes to put the face of the other before him. And when he sees the face of the other, therefore he sees God. And so if we understand that our moment at Sinai is our moment of obligation and responsibility, that happens in each encounter that we have with another person. It's easy when those encounters with other people are people that we have an easy time with. It's much more challenging when the other that we are facing is one that challenges us. And so for our panel discussions today, we're going to look at the tension between how we serve the other when the other in front of us makes it easy, and how we serve the other when the other in front of us puts up walls and barriers and makes our life very challenging. And yet even in those moments of challenge, Musar obligates us to be able to serve that other. And I think we're going to hear quite beautifully from our three panelists how they have managed to do that, to bring Levinas's work into the real world. So with that, I'm going to turn to Valerie and invite you to share your story first.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's really a blessing to be here. So my personal exodus from slavery started from just that. When I was very young, I had an extremely difficult relationship with my mother. It was abusive, and my only concern was survival. So when I was 17, I left home. That was the only thing I knew to do. I was in such a state of turmoil and fear that I escaped. That was my first step towards freedom. But it was still a state of slavery because I was enmeshed in fear and resentment and a very negative place that even then I knew I didn't want to stay in, but I didn't quite know how to proceed. So over the years, went through periods of estrangement and all the while wishing and hoping that I could find another emotional place to be. And over time, I managed to go beyond just survival, and I was able to thrive, but still there was this very difficult distance and negativity between my mother and the rest of my family. So over time, we at least got to a place where we could talk to each other. It was very guarded. It was very challenging. It was not any kind of warm relationship, but at least we were talking to each other. Then my mother gradually aged, developed Alzheimer's, went into decline. And by about 10 years ago, I was asking myself the question, having gone into, through adulthood and gotten to a much better place for myself personally, but I was still asking myself the question, how can I protect myself while still fulfilling the mitzvah of honoring my parent? And at that point, the best that I felt that I could do was only make sure that she was safe and well cared for, and she was in an assisted living facility. And the closest that I could get, while still respecting myself, was making sure about all those things, safeguarding her finances, making sure that she was well cared for, and a perfunctory once a week phone call, which lasted usually about 60 seconds. And that's about the best that I could do. It was realistic, it was consistent, it was a good balance, but it really didn't address still a lot of the emotional baggage that I was living with. I still felt deep distrust and fear and resentment, and I still carried all that around in me, and I felt guilty about feeling that towards my mother. Well, on top of that, I felt that it was my responsibility, that I had to fix it. I had to fix everything. I had to be the best. I had to be better than anybody else. I was very hard on myself. I was very hard on others. And I was very judgmental. I looked down on people that I felt didn't meet my standards. And that was the personal Mitzrayim that I was trapped in at that point. It was a very challenging, difficult place. And then I was just so fortunate to be involved in a Musar class with Rabbi Kamras. And there were several midot that I learned during that Musar class that really became very powerful guides for me. And the number one midah was humility. I still remember the first day in Rabbi Kamras's class when I looked through the text and I read some of the conceptual ideas about humility. It was an earthquake. I had never seen those concepts or thought about those concepts. It absolutely shook me up. I remember that first class, I had to go home and have a beer. So the working on humility and practicing humility, which I did, I realized that this is it. This was going to help me free myself from this turmoil and this state of emotional enslavement. Really, there's no other way to put it. So I practiced humility every day. I still do. I still practice it every day. And what it did for me was it enabled me to see a bigger picture of the world. It enabled me to reframe where I belonged and what was mine to do and what was not mine to do. And everything was not just about me, and I'm just another human being. I have strengths and weaknesses, and I'm flawed and imperfect, just like everybody else. So when I had that larger sense of the world, it gradually enabled me to move into a practice of patience. So with this daily practice of patience, I was able to relax and let go of the pressure that I felt of having to fix everything all the time, of having to be something that I wasn't, and expecting myself to be perfect. I was able to gradually develop a sense of gentleness with myself and with others. And that gentleness gradually started to bring me towards equanimity, which was never something I'd ever experienced as a younger person. So the practice of equanimity allowed me to detach and to care for myself and to start to accept things the way they are. And I was able to view my life as a curriculum that unfolded every day. just my life unfolding, no more, no less, just a curriculum every day. And I found that I still felt those same emotions. I still felt the fear and the distrust and the anger and the resentment, but I wasn't distressed by having those emotions anymore. They just arose and I observed them and I felt them and I was able to let them go. I didn't have to act on them and they started to lose their power over me. And as I just was not enslaved as much by the emotions and I was able to release them, I found that I was able to become silent. The silence was something I was able to practice. And the more silence I was able to practice, the more room that there was for contemplation. And then the length of my Bechira moments, those beautiful spots of time in between the stimulus and response, you know, like the Matrix, when Neo sees the bullets up in the air and he can stop them and make them fall. Those Bechira points were getting wider and wider and wider. And it enabled me to make wise choices instead of just reacting. And being able to make wise choices brought on this profound feeling of gratitude. I felt I already had everything, that my life suddenly was filled with abundance. I had everything that I would ever need right here, right now, in the moment. And I didn't have to judge. I could accept things the way they were. I felt acceptance of myself and compassion for myself. And I started to be able to feel acceptance for my mother and compassion for my mother. And that all came together in one of those perfunctory phone calls that I made. I found that in one of those phone calls, I was able to be completely present for my mother, even in her state of decline. She still knew who I was. She still knew she was on the phone with her daughter. But so much of the rest of her had started to fall away that she was only in the present moment. And I was able to accept exactly where she was during one of those phone calls, to the degree that I could say, "How are you feeling today?" And she said, "Well, it's just wonderful. I'm looking out of the window of my beautiful apartment and I see a palm tree." And I was able to say, "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it? That palm tree. You really enjoy it, don't you?" And she said, "Yes, it just makes me feel so. And I said, "It makes you feel relaxed?" "Yes, that's exactly how I feel. That palm tree makes me feel so relaxed." And just for 2 or 3 minutes, the back and forth, I was able to be completely present to my mother's experience without judging her, without expecting anything from her, without any sense of negativity other than the ability to provide a complete connection that I saw her. I was just able to be with her and the past did not have to intrude. And that for me was perhaps the most profound sense of freedom that I ever experienced in my entire relationship with my mother. And so I appreciate the opportunity to tell that story.
Valerie, thank you. So there's 2 questions. One that came from the individuals who are with us. There may be more questions that Philip received, but one question that came from the group, and then I have a follow-up question as well. The question that was asked was, what is your personal practice with regard to humility? Like, how do you use the midah of anava in a way that regulates you, especially in those moments where, you know, and this is the second question, you know, the way in which you ended your story, which, by the way, thank you for sharing and for opening yourself up in such a way that hopefully the rest of us can learn from you and with you in terms of our own personal challenges and struggles. But in that moment where it was so idyllic sounding, what happens when it doesn't go so well for you? What happens in those moments where they don't turn out the way that you had hoped, where you can't get out of your own way and see the other person? So I guess, the two-part question is, one is, what is your personal humility practice? And number two is, when it doesn't work, how do you realign yourself? How do you come back to the place where you can still see the face of that other outside of your own distress?
Thank you for that great question. I would have to answer that by saying that early on, when I first started practicing Musar, it was so clear to me that humility was going to be the challenge for the rest of my life. It was never going to be over. It was never going to be fixed. It was going to have to be part of my practice every day for the rest of my life. So with starting Musar, as we all know, there's a very fixed process that we go through with the particular midah of the week or the month, and then we cycle back through them. So for me, it wasn't a week of humility. It was months of humility. I decided it was not enough. Even whatever the other midah that were on the table in the class, for me, I realized personally, that's just my own understanding of myself, that was never something that I could ever set aside. So I just followed, at first, I followed the very rigorous practice of Musar that says you journal, you do this, you do that, you have phrases and things that are lined up for you. And the very first phrase was, occupy your rightful place, no more, no less. All right, so that was the first phrase that resonated with me so deeply. Over time, I have discovered that other phrases may be apropos to certain other circumstances. And gradually over time, what I've learned is that another powerful phrase for me is, know what belongs to me and know what is mine to do and know what is not mine to do. That seems to work very well for me in my professional life. And it keeps me in line. And then gradually the phrases have changed for me. It's not all about me. It's not all about me. At one point in my life, there was a phrase that was very relevant that said to me, how many other people are you inconveniencing by insisting on having it your way, meaning my way? And I did some math and I discovered, my gosh, if I insisted on having it my way, it would be inconveniencing 3 other family members. And that really said, okay, well, let's start doing the math all the time. So even though I may not officially anymore, what I should say is that right now it has become so ingrained in me that when I get into a circumstance where it's not going so well, and I feel that, that those flames rising, because I also meditate every day and I really do practice every single day, I have learned to recognize those warning signs. So the warning signs trigger almost an automatic response in me. And the first thing I do, my default question is, humility. What are you stepping out of your rightful space? Are you inconveniencing others? Do you think that the world is all about you? I mean, instantly that it's become an automatic response. So I hope that answers the question.
Very much so, Valerie. Thank you. And the comments, again, which you're not seeing, but I am seeing, are so appreciative of you sharing the personal story, because it's one thing to live in the realm of the philosophical bechol dor vador. It's another to be able to translate it into the everyday challenges that we have with the people who we are bound to very much so in our lives. And alive or dead, our parents play such an important role in who we are, that giving this as an example has been very, very helpful, I think, to those of us who have gathered. So thank you. I hope we're going to come back to you. I hope we're going to have time. But I wanted to turn, Philip, I just want to make sure, did I miss anything? I want to give you a chance.
There's a couple of direct messages here. You know, one of the big, I'll just preamble it by saying that one of the big processes in Musar practice, of course, is to start by going from sleep to being awake, and then from wakefulness to watchfulness, etc., as we learned in MY. So this question follows on that, and then perhaps Valerie, you can comment on it, or Rabbi, at your discretion. This comes from one of the participants. How do we stay awake when we are enslaved to fear and anxiety from the world around us? How can we wake up when we just want to hide ourselves from the brutality in the world?
So Valerie, I want to give you a chance if you want to answer that question. But if not, you have a free pass.
Oh, well, I'm happy to offer my own
opinion, please.
If that would be helpful.
Please. And I think it not only would it be helpful, but it would be what's beneficial about this panel is to hear from practitioners of Musar, not simply just teachers of Musar. So I think it would benefit all of us. So thank you.
I too feel dismay and fear and worry and anxiety very often about the state of our world. What helps me is remembering that everybody feels the same thing. Everybody, it's not just me. Everyone has moments when they feel frightened and worried and filled with anxiety about the state of our world. Everybody. That immediately brings me into a community of humanity. We are all built this way. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. It actually doesn't even mean there's anything wrong with the world. It means that that's part of our collective and individual curriculum to face the fear and the worry and the anxiety. There was a meditation that was offered a few months ago during the daily sit for the Institute for Jewish Spirituality that I find has been tremendously helpful for this. And the meditation that was offered was, knowing that I am feeling fear and anxiety about the state of the world, and knowing that others, maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of other people breathing and living right now in the world might be feeling exactly the same way. What comfort would I offer them? How would I pray for them? What comfort would I wish to send off to them? Meaning, how would I comfort myself? And then how would I comfort others? So that's also a practice that I do. When I ask myself, what would be healing for others feeling that? And then I can offer it to myself as well and try and offer it to everyone.
Thank you. It's like the metaphor from last week about the Seder. We first have to feed ourselves, and then we can feed others. Valerie, we can go on, but I want to give Paul and Cheryl an opportunity to share their story. So Paul Einseidler, please, if you could answer the same question, how you have moved out, Yetziat Mitzrayim, from slavery to redemption or to redemptive moments. You're muted, Paul. Happens to all of us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'll start with the question of where did the journey begin? Where am I coming from? Some 25 years ago, we enrolled our son in a Jewish day school. And I wanted to get involved, and I convinced myself that I wanted to get involved in a leadership position for him, to have him see me and that I was part of the educational system. And when I say I convinced myself, what I really mean is I rationalized that that's why I wanted to do it. But in truth, I was trapped in what I call my own Mitzrayim, the area of constriction and narrowness of my own thinking. And as Philip said, I was in a state of sleep. What was my Mitzrayim? It was, in a word, my ego. I felt self-important, and I wanted a sense of self-aggrandizement. And so I wanted to be seen, and I wanted to be appreciated. In essence, I wanted to be a macher at the school. And as it turned out, as it is with all 7- and 8-year-olds, there were times when my son misbehaved. And he would go to the office and be benched and have to see the vice principal or whatever. And rather than see him as himself, as a young boy at that age, and ask, what was he needing? What was he missing? Was it attention from home? Was it that the schoolwork was too slow and he was bored? Was it he wanted to just do what his friends were doing to get along? I took it as on myself that it gave me shame. How could I be a leader of this school and move the school forward and yet have my kid misbehave? I didn't know how to deal with that. And again, I was stuck in this narrowness of my just thinking about how it affected me. No consideration of what his burden might be. And just as, Avadim Hayinu b'Mitzrayim, and when we left Egypt, we had to wander a long time before we got to the promised land. I too had to wait and suffer, years of thinking about it, rigorous honesty, therapy, and finally arriving at Musar. And it helped me tremendously to find some moments of redemption in my relationship with him. Had I known what Musar was back then, I would have used some various midot to try to correct my behavior and be more mindful of the other. The first one would be anava, or humility, as Valerie mentioned, which is a decentering of myself, my ego, making myself smaller and making room for the other, in this case, my son. Seeing really what his burden was, which was supposed to be why I was there in the first place. The other midah would be shkita, considered speech. I'm ashamed to say that my reaction to his behavior was to bully him, to let him know that he was ruining my prospects of success as a board member, and that my speech was not reflective and abusive. And that pained me greatly, but I didn't see it at the time. The last one I would have used would be nikiyut, which would have been a cleaner, more clear understanding of my motivations and of why I wanted to be a leader, to have been more honest with myself and have a cleaner perspective of why I really wanted to do that. So we fast forward to the present time. We're in the midst of an awful pandemic that has affected all of us terribly. And as it happens in my family, we experienced a severe illness in September. My sister-in-law was diagnosed with cancer. She had been hospitalized for a surgery and somehow or somewhere then contracted COVID. My wife, her sister, sunk into a very deep despair and total fear about the loss of her sister. She had already lost one sister to cancer some years ago, and this was her last sister, and she was beside herself with anxiety. So I also want to mention that some years before this, my wife and I had some trust and honesty issues that we only partially resolved in our marriage. So learning from the Musar experience, I clearly saw that what my burden was to bear her burden. I had to lessen the space that I needed for myself by cutting back my leisure activities and the things that I wanted to do, since I had a lot of leisure during this time at home. And I decided that what she needed was to retreat and to experience her pain and suffering to fully, so that she could work through it. And so I assumed all the responsibilities of the household, from cleaning to cooking to food planning to cleanup to serving her. I took over all the medical communication with the hospital staff and dealt with all the insurance to assure that my sister would be covered by her plan. Her husband was also alone. They lived just the two of them in an apartment. And when she was hospitalized, he was alone. He had dementia, and we had to make sure that he was taken care of as well. So I had his burden to deal with also. So I arranged for caregivers and took him out occasionally so that he wouldn't feel so isolated. My wife then became positive for COVID and had to be isolated for about 3 weeks. And then I took care of her for those 3 weeks by moving out of my bedroom, giving her space, feeding her meals, sharing correspondence and mail with her, and just seeing her in her need and stepping up to do whatever I could. I was able to really see her for one of the first times and put her ahead of myself. And through this, indirectly from it, trust began to be reestablished between us. It wasn't even spoken. It was more like a working or acting amends. It wasn't a verbal amends, because I had made those and they fell flat. Because when I made those amends, I really didn't see her. Here, I was living through what I wanted her to see. And so the redemption in our relationship came not through a perfect outcome of my sister's condition, which it's not going to be a perfect outcome, but through the flashes and the moments of closeness and love that my wife and I experienced through this process. I needed and I used many of the midot that I had studied the previous 4 years. Thank God for them. The first one I used was seder. I had to organize all my affairs to make room for the other person. I had to clear the decks and prioritize what was important in our lives. I also used the midah of nuchuta, or calmness. I had to stay calm and focused on what I needed to do, because I needed to take charge, but in a humble way, and maintain my repose so that I could be there for the other members of my family. Lastly, I used the midah of haritzut, or decisiveness, because when I understood what had to be done, I did it without hesitation. And I made sure that the commitments that we had were met. I knew that I could not take away my wife's suffering, that was her pain to bear for herself. But what I could do was bear the burden by listening and showing the concern for her anxiety and loss, and showing her that she could count on me to stand with her. So I'd like to leave you with a beautiful quote that sums up what Musar has really done for me. It says, "The word I means here I am, and answering for everything and for everyone." Thank you.
Paul, thank you. Sorry, Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul, for that incredibly moving personal presentation of Musar principles. We can't thank you enough. Time is drawing a little tight here, so we'll move on to Cheryl Colker. And then if we have any time at all at the end, I just want to say, if we don't have time and we have to shut down, that there's been just a plethora of wonderful comments of support for all the presenters so far. So Cheryl?
Hello, I will be brief. How about that? Um,
Don't cut your story, Cheryl. It's powerful and we have 10 minutes. So use those 10 minutes, as you see fit.
You got it. So hello, everybody. I'm very blessed and grateful to be here. It's I'm a little nervous, but luckily I can't see all of you. I can just see me. So like I do all day long with my students, I feel like I'm talking to myself. And that's how I'm calming myself. But anyway, my story began also as a child with my mother. And I was legally neglected by my mom. And growing up, I lived with my dad and I saw my mom on the weekends, and I was such a good little girl that I forgave her because I felt sorry for her. You know, she clearly couldn't do her job. But when I got a little bit older, I continued to feel sorry for her, but I started to lose respect. And because she started wanting things from me, right? She was an other that was needing something from me. And I was very resentful because I didn't feel that she deserved it. And I made all kinds of reasons. I mean, in my mind, I felt very legitimate because she wasn't there for me as a child. Why should I be there for her as an adult? And I worked on that a lot in my Musar, obviously. And one of the things that the way that I've worked on many midot throughout the years and with many different situations. And what I do every day is I meditate and I journal. I do what's called heshbon hanefesh, and there's a very specific way we journal in Musar. And what I do is I look at my day pretty much every day. I've gotten much better at writing over the years because I realized that that was one of the tools that was missing and for me, and that when I do that, that actually accelerates my growth. So writing every day about how I behaved this day, how I behaved, what I'm proud of and what I need to do to make me better than I was the day before. And not only do I write about my mom, but I write about other things as well. So to make a very long story short, and I'm losing my train of thought. Over the years, I have been able to let go of my anger. And one of the ways that I've really changed is that I decided, and this has been gradual. This has been through all of the work. It wasn't like one day I just woke up and decided I'm going to forgive my mom. But slowly but surely, I started calling my mom more, because what happened was at the beginning, for years, I would avoid her calls. I was nice, but I didn't really engage with her. I wasn't there for her. I wasn't available emotionally. And in Musar, we're taught that our main responsibility is to be there for the other, to be present. And I was clearly not being present for my mom. I was able through this work to be present in most situations in my life. But this one I felt was an exception, until I realized that this is the big one, and this is the one that I really need to be there for, because she is the most challenging one. So little by little, I started calling her more, and lo and behold, the more I called, the less needy she became. And I started calling every day, and instead of our conversations having to be 45 minutes, where she would literally time the conversations, and I would have to say, Mom, we spoke, I would look at my clock and say, okay, it's been like 37 minutes. I said, okay to get off now? Because I was so distracted and just really wanting to get on to the next thing. So now we have phone calls daily. I don't look at my clock. They're short sometimes, but they're genuine, and I am available emotionally. And she is so grateful, and I'm so grateful, because we have this intimate connection now. And it's really beautiful, because I have been able to connect with many people on this level. I know I left out a lot of things, but to be able to do that with my mom, with her and my imperfections, just to be able to see her and be emotionally available has been really a gift. And I feel like I left out a lot of things that I had planned on saying, but that's about all I have for now. And I'm very grateful to be here and to, especially amongst my teachers and Rabbi Stone, who I loved the last program that you did last week or a couple weeks ago. I just listened to it this morning and it was so right on. And it just reminded me really of my story and my growth and what I attempt to do every day. So thank you so much.
Cheryl, I'm sorry you felt rushed. And I know in our previous conversation, we talked a little bit. One of the things that you had spoken about was how you use your Ner Tamid.
Yes, thank you. I meant to talk about
the other thing that we talked about was that, redemption for you, as for Valerie and for Paul, is not about achieving a certain state, but it's about having redemptive moments.
Correct.
And so maybe, for a couple of minutes, if you are willing to share how that your Ner Tamid does that, how you, brought that into a place of forgiveness for your mother, because you spoke about that as well. The ability to forgive was the space that you found to be able to be emotionally present. That might be helpful to, the group that's gathered.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. That was back there in my brain somewhere. So what a Ner Tamid is a statement of ourselves at our best. And my Ner Tamid is I see you. And what I feel about the Ner Tamid is it's sort of a for me, my understanding of it, or the way I see it, is it's sort of a collection of all of the midot, humility, patience, seder, all of them together. And because while I do those on a weekly basis, the overall thing that reminds me of how to be in Tov is when I say to myself, I see you. And when I am able to see every other in my life, whoever happens to be in front of me, but we're talking about my mom, I am able to be available to her and just see her as another suffering, loving human on the planet. And that's my goal daily. So literally any meeting that I go into, any class that I teach, whatever I do, any clients that I sit before, my goal is I say to myself, I see you. And when I'm present, I allow myself to connect with others. And that's sort of the way I use my Ner Tamid. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. It didn't answer the question about how you found the space to forgive your mom, but that's going to be for another time.
Okay, sounds good.
Unless you have a minute answer, which I don't want to rush you.
The minute, it really isn't a minute answer. It's really been a process. And it wasn't a simple, I can't answer it in a minute. It's been a development of all of the things that I've been doing. And all of a sudden, and it literally clicked one day, like I just started reaching out. But it was almost like I took the action before the forgiveness came. And the more I took the action, the more the anger dissipated, because the anger was replaced with love.
And I guess thank you for that, because the thread that weaves through your story, Cheryl, and yours, Valerie, and yours, Paul, is that it's about a leap of action, not a leap of faith, 100%. That you have to do, that you have to work, that this is a practice, that's what Musar is. Musar isn't a mental game. It's actually throwing yourself in front of the other and saying, here I am in all my naked vulnerabilities, and I want you to know that I see you. And it's not about my own fears, even though they're very real. It's about how I can serve you despite the getting in my own way over and over again. It's again about redemptive moments. It's about a journey. It's not about arriving at a particular place. And so we are grateful today to all of you. I am personally grateful as three of you have become such important teachers at Shomrei Torah Synagogue in each of your special and unique ways. And I am grateful that you were so open to sharing with all of those who have gathered your personal stories in order to help guide all of us in the practice of Musar. So Philip, I turn it back over to you to close out this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Camrus and Cheryl and Valerie and Paul. After you see those three such personal stories and how Musar has impacted their lives in such positive ways. For those of you who are new to Center for Contemporary Musar, all you have to do is listen to those presentations and understand how significant that can be in your life. We welcome you to come to the CCM website and take a look at it and join us for the future presentations. There's 3 more left here before Pesach. All of them have the word metaphor in them. And so we urge you to not only use these 3 presentations and Rabbi Camrus's as you move toward this coming Pesach in a different kind of way, so that this is a new and different kind of Passover as you move forward. We thank you so very, very much for all of your participation. We couldn't get all the questions. We apologize. So thank you once again, everybody. Good night.